Welcome back, Night Scorps, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading, and I'm making that statistic up, podcast about everything Charles Band, be it the amazing early productions, the incredible Empire International Pictures, or the unforgettable Full Moon features. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, and I am coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, which, if you didn't know, is a small town with a population of 539. And who is co-piloting this alien spaceship with me today?
Well, this is Steve Guntley, and I know who's going to be the biggest grabber, and that's me. I'm the grabber, because I'm coming to you from Austin, Texas, the cowboy capital of the world, if you don't know. And this is the podcast that's all about lizard cowboys, tin cup divinations, and outdoor ceiling fans, because this is the episode that's all about Oblivion, a 1994 film directed by Sam Irwin, written by Peter David. We're going to go into all of this wonderful little cowboy sci-fi space opera in just a moment, but we actually have a special guest with us here today.
We sure do. The person sitting here to join us in our conversation about Oblivion is none other than author, sci-fi horror author, podcaster, and all-around amazing person, Mr. Dylan James Quarles. Dylan, welcome.
Heyo, thanks for having me on, fellas.
Oh, so happy to have you on.
Super excited to have you on. And Dylan, I just want to show before we get started, this is terrible radio, but I've got a copy of one of your books in my hand right now.
He's holding it up. Would you like me to describe it?
Yes,
listeners?
Please do.
It's a book. It has many pages. There's a title, and then there's a name, and it's my name on the cover. Oh, the book also has a cover, I should have said.
Oh, yeah, I think you missed that part. There is a cover, folks. Don't worry, there's a cover on this.
This is high-class shit here, people, all right? I'm not trying to pull a fast one. You get a cover when you buy one of my books.
That's a guarantee. Not a lot of people can promise.
Not everyone. Not in the publishing world these days.
The name of the book we should mention is There Be Monsters by Dylan James Quarles. Yes. You're a podcaster as well. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
I certainly am. So after doing the rounds on other people's podcasts like this one, I was like, you know what? I want to break into this world myself because I feel like I've got something to say that hasn't yet been said in the world of movies, which stop the presses it seems impossible, and it might be. So if you've already beat me to the punch on this idea, I'm sorry I didn't know, but my co-host and I have a little podcast we call Barstool Film School, where we get together every other week because I cannot do what you guys do. I have a life to live, and we discuss movies. All right, what a novel idea, but with the caveat of, are they good bar movies? Meaning, are they good to watch while you're in a bar? Because I think most people over the age of 21, and if you're not over 21, then I don't know how you had this experience, but most people have been in a bar at some point in their life. Maybe they went to catch up with a friend, maybe they went to just have like a beer, and then there's this movie on in the background, like over the bar. And it could be like any kind of movie, and that's like sort of the point of the show is like there's really we're trying to define what this is, this movie that just like it's on in the bar, and before you realize it, you've stayed for way longer than you intended to, or you haven't caught up with that friend like you were supposed to. You guys just both zoned out and started watching the bar movie. And we kind of had the idea for the show because my co-host is a bar owner, and whenever I'd go to his bar all the time to write and not get a lot of writing done because he has great taste in movies, and he'd always put these movies on over the bar, and I'd end up like fucking watching the movie and not getting any writing done. And then we'd also end up just talking about movies. We were both big MCU heads before the fatigue set in after the Thanos snap, and we used to talk about that like to the point that it was, probably obnoxious to other patrons in the bar, and definitely my wife, who is oftentimes with me. So like, yeah, we just got together. We're like, let's just do this podcast. Let's get to the bottom of what it is that makes a movie a good bar movie. And we like to use the phrase, does this movie pass the bar? Because we're cute like that. This is an audio medium, and you have to use wordplay.
I appreciate that. Yeah. So, like, what's a good example? Not to get too far ahead of the premise of your podcast, but what's like a good example of a bar movie that you found versus a bad example of a bar movie?
Okay, so our inaugural episode was on Speed, which I kind of think is like almost like a no-brainer, right? Like because we have a metric which we actually didn't have in place at the time of recording Speed. We do now. So if you're jumping in with Speed, just keep going. You'll see we get to the we take it to the lab. We really workshop this puppy, but you know, you're watching like art IRL. You're watching like something happen before your eyes with this podcast, people. So it did not spring fully formed. Let's just say that. But Speed, you know, the rewatchability on that movie is incredible. Like you could watch it one evening and then the next morning, if it's on the TV, you're probably gonna kind of like stick around a little longer than you mean to, or find yourself your eyes straying to the screen. So we were like, okay, this is automatically a good bar movie. We just get right out ahead of it in that episode. We're like, this movie passes the bar, moving on.
Yeah.
And then we proceed to talk about it for like an hour.
The episode, I was gonna say, the episode is about 12 seconds long.
Yeah.
Speedy.
It passes the
Appropriately
bar.
speedy.
Good night. Exactly. Yeah. We say speed and then we just, we're out. The rest of the episode is just like room noise, and you can kind of hear us distantly in the background, cracking open beers, because we do drink while we're recording, because you know that's the premise of the show. And my my co-host is a mixologist and all around dope dude who knows a lot of stuff about alcohol, not just like how it makes you feel, but how they craft it, you know. And I'm kind of like a layman when it comes to that world, which is cool because it works out for us on the show. But
I
can
like actually posit a bad bar movie just based off of this conversation. If a good bar movie is Speed, I think a bad bar movie is Speed 2 Cruise Control. Because that would be distracting, because you would be looking up at the screen and be like, all right, this looks kind of familiar. Sandra Bullock's in this movie. What movie was she on a boat? Who's this guy? Like, that would be a distracting bar movie, whereas the first Speed has so many iconic moments, you're not really going to need to be devoting your full attention.
And we tried to do, like, we try to, like, make sure that we're really covering all our bases. Like, we even do hit movies that we are like, this is a bad movie, but maybe it's a good bar movie. Like, famously, I don't know if I can use that. I'm going to get liberal with my words around here, but we covered Lady in the Water.
Oh,
and
God.
Yeah, it was a request from a friend, a mutual friend of Jared and I's, and she was like, I saw this movie in a bar, and I think it was probably the only acceptable way to see this movie. So I thought, that's actually kind of intriguing. I wanted to get outside the box for our second episode. We did Speed for the first one. I didn't want people to think it was going to be all like Speed and Face Off and like, you know, Total Recall and just like bangers, because I wanted to be like, it's fun to also talk about shitty movies. So let's see if Lady in the Water passes the bar. The Lady in the Bar got up and left the bar when that movie came on, or should have, because it didn't pass the bar, spoiler alert. But it was a lot of fun to talk about. So we just kind of, you know, we range around, and Cameron and I, my co-host, we're like old friends. So kind of like you guys, it's like, it's easy to just get into it and start, you know, it's a leaping off point, really, but it's a lot of fun. And we recently had the mayor of our town on to record an episode on the Scorpion King, and boy, things got a little loose there because we were drinking whiskey on the rocks, because the Rock is in the movie. Anyway, I really am excited for that episode to come out so that my reputation in this town can be completely obliterated, and I can take the mayor down with me. It's like a twofer.
Perfect.
Like an into political career.
That's amazing. That's a really fun premise for a show. And like, yeah, I think Lady in the Water is such like a fever dream of a movie that makes no sense.
Totally.
And so I think looking up at that, you're like, you know, and that's like, I imagine most bars are going to have them like muted or something, you know, so
exactly.
You're not even going to hear about all the
of it.
snarfs and the whatever.
No, you read it. You have to read it on the closed captioning and be like, wait, did that guy just say Narf? What is Madam Narf?
What the fuck is that?
Yeah.
Why is half that guy's body jacked and the other half is not? What's going on?
Exactly.
Like,
And it's so that's like we were like, maybe this movie does work, because you would be looking up. We have a WTF factor that's part of our grading metric, and you might look up and go, what the fuck am I even looking at right now? And you know, anyway.
So that's my favorite.
I'm thinking Oblivion might be a really good WTF candidate for like a bar movie.
It certainly
Well, I have to tell you,
is.
I treated it like that. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I love about the premise of your show, Dylan, is that you can have either of those experiences. Like, you can go to a bar and see a really familiar movie that's just a banger, like you said, and you can look at it and you can know what's happening in the scene. You can know the dialogue in the scene without having to hear it just on sight alone. But you also have the opposite experience. And I know a friend of mine owns a bar in Brooklyn, and we go to a lot, and they often have these two small TVs that have like the sci-fi channel or something similar playing with on mute with the closed captioning on. And one of the games like my wife and I play a lot is trying to figure out what movie is playing, because it's usually pretty obscure stuff. And it's fun because it prompts a conversation about it. Like you said, Lady in the Water, like who's really going to have a conversation about Lady in the Water unless your goal is just to drag it for sucking. But here it's like you go, oh yeah, like, well, that's kind of weird. That's kind of interesting. Maybe
Yeah.
like this movie takes on a different life with no sound, with
Yeah,
the closed
exactly. Like,
captioning on.
you're like, is that a dog made of grass? Like, hold on. You gotta like really like you kind of pause the conversation to like appreciate what it is you're seeing. To your point, Steve, this Oblivion, I treated it like an episode of my show a little bit.
Okay.
When I was watching it, and I was like taking notes, and then I was like, oh, okay, I see what's happening here. So I got up and I went about my business, and I like was moving around the house and taking care of my son and all that, and I was watching it and I was reading the closed captioning, and I was like, this is actually a pretty good bar movie right here.
I imagine so, because this is a very tropey movie. Like, you might be looking at it and thinking like, oh, well, I mean, if you look at any individual stills of this movie, it's kind of batshit and it doesn't make sense. But at the core
Sure.
of it, this has a lot of Western tropes and a lot of classic sci-fi tropes. So you're going to be able to follow what's going on without necessarily
100%.
needing to pay attention to the
If
close
you've seen a
beats.
if
Yeah.
you've seen a cowboy movie, if you've seen a Western where the bad guys come in and take over the town and then the good guys have to run them out,
Yeah.
you've seen this movie. But with the interesting little asides of lizard men and
Yeah.
robot ladies and night scorps, as was mentioned earlier. So it's got WTF factor going on for sure, and some of the dialogue too is fun to read when you haven't exactly been like pen in hand following along and keeping notes. You're like, wait, what the fuck did that person just say?
So this movie really has a lot of the hallmarks of a full moon movie. I think this falls right in the between subspecies and head of the family era of early to mid 90s full moon at the height of its powers. So Dylan, let me ask you before we get too much into the movie plot wise or scene by scene or behind the scenes or whatever, what's your relationship with full moon as a company, and also like what's your relationship with just horror and exploitation type cinema in general?
First part, I am a relative newcomer to the world of full moon. Well, I guess that's not exactly true. I'm a relative intentional newcomer. Like I didn't used to seek these movies out. I had seen them here and there because I'm a horror hound, but it's kind of a specific type of horror. Like you can keep your Houses of a Thousand Corpses and you can keep your Robert Zombies and all that other stuff. I don't need it. I don't need Saw in my life or Hostel. I can just watch the news if I want to feel bad about human trafficking. But I like horror movies that are like kind of campy, schlocky, lots of boobers, lots of cool kills. I went to film school. That's where you get the film school part of the Barstool Film School in our podcast. I should have
Also,
said
where
that.
the
He owns
term
the bar.
boobers comes from. That's a film school term. I think that
Boobers
was
is a
you-
film school
you
term.
said-
Yeah, it's a script writing term.
I
yeah.
minored in boobers at film school.
Yes, we all did, or at least that's what we say. But yeah, so like that's more my kind of like wheelhouse, and I do love some like good elevated horror as well. I know that's like a charged term; people have different definitions for it. But like with the full moon pictures, your first episode you mentioned mom dropping you off at the grocery store in the movie aisle and going about her business. That was also my experience because I am an elder millennial as well. So like I totally remember that experience. Monkey Shines was a movie that I thought I knew for decades until I actually saw it. And a lot of those full moon movies were ones as well where I mean I remember I had concepts about Puppet Master that lived inside my head for so long before I eventually actually began to tuck into that series and really consume those films. So horror and I go back pretty far, being a little kid and trying to glean what I could from the movie box because I was a little too scared to actually watch it. I think the real dam broke for me around when I watched Dead Alive with my girlfriend in high school, and I was getting into making movies myself and just seeing like the sheer level of like problem solving on the screen. If that's like, I know it's like you expect people to like horror for the blood and the boobers, technical term, all these things, the special effects, because the stories are kind of weirdly timeless. People have been telling scary stories forever. Some of the earliest stories are scary stories, but like what I really was attracted to was the problem solving I was seeing on screen. Like it's obvious you have a limited budget. It's obvious that you have a huge ambition. And so where do those two things meet, and where do you have to give ground? I just thought it was so fucking fascinating to watch. And like that movie is incredible to watch, like the editing tricks, the camera tricks between the special effects. You know, if you haven't seen it, listeners, do go out, especially if you're a Lord of the Rings head.
100%.
LOTR. Yeah, because Peter Jackson, man, used to do incredible stuff before he got addicted to fucking computers. But like that movie like was okay, now I must. And then it was Evil Dead, and it was everything after that. I just had to keep finding these people, like Sam Raimi's another example of that, these problem solvers, because they really seem to come up through horror, a lot of them. I guess Robert Rodriguez, it counts for me too, and El Mariachi's not a horror movie, but it has horror elements. You got a decapitated head in it, you got a dream sequence, that's spooky. But so that just blew the lid off it for me. And then when I went to college, I made numerous student horror movies because H.P. Lovecraft's properties entered the public domain my freshman year of college. So it was like all bets are off. And I like every fucking person that went to art school, I had a roommate who was obsessed with H.P. Lovecraft. So, you know, he would pin the screenplays, we would shoot them, and we'd hold these little premieres, and it was all about like 2 shots of the movie. It was like what I was there for. Like we made this whole 40-minute movie, but it's all about the scene when the guy stabs the other dude in the head with the needle, or where we built our first squib, and we had to and I had a blank firing gun, and we had to be like, okay, we're gonna get one take before somebody calls the campus police. So 3, 2, 1, action, bang! You know, like shoot that gun. Now turn the music up really loud. We're having a party. Hopefully nobody noticed. You know, like it was all about that for me. So I just fell in love with horror for the sheer creativity of it as a genre.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm starting to suspect we're the same person on alternate timelines or something. That was very much my origin story too, was looking at those VHSs. I was scared to watch them, but I was fascinated by them. And then Dead Alive was the movie that kind of like broke the dam for me, because I think I was really like scared of the gore and the violence for whatever reason. When I was a younger kid, I was scared of the gore and the violence. And Dead Alive is a movie that is, I think we would all agree, the goriest movie ever made. Like, I don't think there's really anything that's quite touched it. But it is so fun and joyous and cartoonish, and it made me feel like, all right, now I can appreciate this as a craft and not necessarily as something that is going to traumatize me for the rest of my life. Like, that kind of unlocked horror for me in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
Which is where the whole like Saw verse doesn't work for me, because we're not being schlocky really anymore.
No, now it's just being gross and misogynistic and dumb. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
my
I'm with you.
experience very similar as well. And you know, as it comes to full moon, you said you're more recently intentional full moon watcher. I mean, I feel like we both are as well, and over the last handful of years. But one of the things that stands out for me, it's not full moon proper. It is Empire, but one of those VHS boxes that I remember as a kid that was really enticing to me that I couldn't wait to see was Stuart Gordon's Dolls.
Oh, yeah.
Which is
I watched that a
one
few years ago.
that I can't wait to hit on the show eventually, because it's now I'm really going to get it.
Totally
When
weird.
we talk about that and From Beyond and Reanimator and Ghoulies,
Great movie.
some of these Empire ones, that's when I'm going to have a little more connection to my childhood. I don't have a childhood connection to Full Moon, but I definitely think this one, Oblivion, was one I knew by name and reputation, but I think my misconception about this movie from the beginning was that it was more action and horror based and less comedy based.
Oh yeah, this one's pretty silly.
I mean, this one I only knew by reputation from like the last couple years as kind of it's getting lumped into the good bad movie conversation. Like there's a riff tracks about this, like this one gets kind of poked fun of a lot, and I don't know, man. I had such a earnestly good time with this movie, like obviously recognizing the camp and the kitsch of it, but there is so much love and so much energy that went into this goofy little movie. I'm excited to talk about it. Let me give a little bit of backstory here. Oblivion was released on VHS in spring of 1994. It was directed by Sam Irwin and written by Peter David. So Sam Irwin, he's the first time we'll talk about him. He's directed 3 Full Moon movies, the 2 Oblivion movies, and then one more called The Magic Island. And he has a very similar resume to other prolific directors that we talked about, similar to David DeCoteau and Fred Olen Ray. So similar to DeCoteau, Irwin got his start as a production assistant to a great director. In this case, he was working with Brian De Palma on Dress to Kill. And he quickly developed a reputation for working fast and working cheap. And Oblivion is only his third film. He's since gone on to direct about 50 more, including, like Fred Olen Ray, several Christmas movies, although I believe Sam Irwin's actually do appear on the Hallmark Channel. Fred Olen Ray's are not actually Hallmark quality, but Sam Irwin's are actual Hallmark movies.
We can finally address all those angry tweets from those Hallmark purists.
About time.
Yeah.
Candace Cameron Bure was about to strangle me with a big piece of tinsel, so I was getting nervous about that. And the
can't
script
engage.
here was
you
written
cannot
by
engage with these people.
You absolutely cannot. No. The script here was written by Peter David. You might know that name because he is a hugely prolific comic book, novel, and screenplay writer who has written extensively for both Marvel and DC. He's actually in the zeitgeist a lot lately because two of his creations just debuted in hugely popular movies this summer. One of them was Phyla Vell, who appears in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and the other is Spider-Man 2099, who is a main character in the excellent new Spider-Verse movie. So Peter
I haven't
David's in
seen that
the-
movie, but I
Yeah.
haven't seen Spider-Verse 2 yet. But that's future Spider-Man, right? 2099,
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
kind of
2099.
like Racing Stripes one. Dude, that
Yeah.
Spider-Man, I remember that comic when it came out.
Yeah.
Because I used to buy comics, but I was never like a comic book guy necessarily. I never like would collect full runs, but I would go to I'd see them and I'd just be like, that cover just get me, and I'd have to have it. And when that future Spider-Man dropped, it blew my mind. And I had a friend who was an incredible, he still is, I shouldn't speak of him in the past tense, incredible artist. And he now does works in many mediums, but one that he's especially good at is painting models. And he sells them. He's so good at it. So I took my regular Spider-Man to him and I said, here's this comic book. Here's my plain little spider. Can you please? And, he gave it back to me in a couple days, and he had painted my regular Spider-Man to look like the 2099 guy, and I was
That's
the
so
coolest
cool.
fucking kid on the playground for, all of however many minutes until the actual toy came out, and then it was like irrelevant. But yeah, I'm super excited.
It's a fantastic design. And I'm not super familiar with the character either. I've read a comic or two here and there, but I really like the way he's used in the movie. A very good movie. Definitely check that out. And Peter David has also written extensively for TV, like Babylon 5. He was one of the big writers on that show for a long time. But he's only written 3 film screenplays. They're all for Full Moon. So he did the 2 Oblivion movies, and then he also wrote Transfers 5. So we'll talk about him a couple more times before we're done here.
One thing also that Peter David wrote that listeners might not be familiar with is the non-canon Star Trek book Imzadi, which is the one that basically explores the early relationship between Will Riker and Deanna Troi. And if you're a person who reads Star Trek related novels, this is considered to be one of the best for next gen novels. I can't speak for all of the thousands of novels that exist for all the other iterations of Star Trek, but
There's so many.
It's wild that you mentioned the writer has some roots in Babylon 5, because I've never actually seen a second of Babylon 5.
Me either.
But one of my favorite television writers, he's credited as the co-creator and writer for Sense8, which was a Netflix show that lived for a brief period of time, and I super duper loved it because I'm like a Wachowski head over here. I pretty much like everything they do. And this was right up my alley because I'm a collective consciousness-y kind of, I live in the Pacific Northwest. We eat mushrooms out here. We get crazy. So
sure.
This premise of the show really appealed to me. Anyway, the co-creator and writer, Michael Straczynski.
Yeah, Michael Straczynski, a very prolific comic book and film writer. Yeah.
Apparently also co-creator of Sense8. And I knew that there was a Babylon 5 connection to Sense8, but so now this movie having that Babylon 5 and Sense8 connection, Oblivion, I should say, has just gone up a couple notches. I think I might need to rewatch it through that. Okay, wait, is there a deeper meaning taking place here that I missed the first watch through, perhaps?
I do have people, even now, every once in a while, somebody will say, hey, Babylon 5, give it a shot, check it out. And I'm just like, you know what? Someday when time is no longer finite, and I can, make time to watch Babylon 5. At this moment, I have a hard time motivating myself to do so. But a lot of people really love it.
I believe you're talking about the eternity post-death.
Oh,
Yes.
that's it. Yeah, okay. I'll get to it post death. Yeah.
as
I'll
as
get
what
to it.
as the giant would say, Gaunt. After you shuffle off this mortal coil, you can
Oh,
watch
absolutely.
Babylon 5.
I'll
You'll
do
have
it
all the
then.
time
I'll
in
do
the
it.
universe.
I'll wait until I see Mr. Gaunt. Uh, yeah. Well, speaking of Mr. Gaunt, I feel like we need to shout this out because, by Full Moon standards, this might be the most star-studded movie they've ever done. Right? Like, I
Really?
can't think of anything with more like recognizable name actors. This is the cast here. Our stars are Richard Joseph Paul and Jackie Swanson. Both of them don't really make much impact. You might remember Jackie Swanson as Woody's fiance on the last couple seasons of Cheers. But
Is she
otherwise,
also the young woman who kills herself at the beginning of
Lethal
Lethal
Weapon.
Weapon?
Yeah, she sure is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I didn't make that connection.
But then we also have Andrew Divoff, who you might know as the Wishmaster or from Lost.
Hell
We
yeah.
have George Takei, Julie Newmar, Meg Foster, Musetta Vander, Carol Strucken, Jimmy Skaggs, and Isaac Hayes are all making appearances in this very goofy movie. Like, yeah, like I said, like all of these are names that you still kind of know, and a lot of the a lot of them are still around and still doing like some cool stuff, or have even had like late career resurgences like Takei, who is surprisingly like the king of social media.
Weird.
Also, at 92 minutes, this is the longest movie we've watched on this show by far. So,
I think
don't
this
know.
one
I don't
beats
know.
out Puppet Master 1 by a minute or two, Subspecies
Yeah.
1
Yeah,
by a couple minutes.
those Puppet Masters come in at around regular movie length, don't they?
Yeah, a little less, but a lot of these we've been watching have been like 65 to 75 minutes long.
Yeah, sweet spot right
which
there.
which is glorious. I have to say this movie reminds me a bit in spirit based on the casting and it being this much relied on a very specific genre bending set pieces. This movie gives me even lower budget Escape from New York vibes.
Yes.
Isaac Hayes probably helps that too.
It
that
doesn't
comparison.
hurt. It doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, well, let's break down the plot a little bit of this movie as it is, because like we said, this is a very tropey movie. It's very based in I would say a really deep love of like pulpy westerns and pulpy sci-fi. Like I don't think this is trying to be much more than it is. I think it is
No,
just
not at
kind
all.
of like meant to celebrate some of its influences in any way that it can. But this takes place in the year 3109, or I might have that year wrong, but it's in the far distant future, and it's on this fringe world, and it's a little old western town on an isolated planet. The town is called Oblivion. It has a population of 539. Oh, strike that, 538, which I was a little confused about. Okay. Not to slow things down already, but the opening moment here is like a mysterious character with some stylish boots is walking into town. There's a sign that has that population on it. There's a little critter on the sign that our mysterious enemy here grabs and kills and then uses its blood to write the 8. Now, are we implying that little guy was a resident of the town, or are we implying
Correct.
that he knows he's going into town to kill the marshal?
I was the second half of that. I thought he was going to kill the marshal, and that's what he was forecasting. He wasn't going to come back out and do it later.
I'm sure that's probably what it was, but I read it when I was first watching it. I'm like, oh no, they killed the mayor. Like, what have
It's
they
also
done?
incorrect
Like,
though, because he brings his whole posse to the town. So if anything,
Yeah.
he's going to take one sheriff, but then he's going to add
544.
Lash, and he's going to add all these other fellas that he's got in his crew.
yeah, he's got Lash, he's got Spanner, he's got Bork, for God's sake. Bork is probably worth at least 2 people.
Don't forget Bork. This guy was? I was like, who is this guy? Because I couldn't. He was stuck in my head. I'd seen him in something, and wouldn't you know it, it was a fucking House of a Thousand Corpses.
Oh,
That's
was
the
it?
last time I'm going to mention that fucking movie on this show, by the way, because I
Erwin
very much do hate
Keyes
it.
is his name.
Yeah.
I think he's kind of a hey, it's that guy, because he's a good like he's got a mug on him, and he's a good
Oh, yeah.
heavy. He was in the Flintstones movie. He was in the Warriors, House of a Thousand Corpses. Yeah, he's been in a lot of stuff. He's got a
He's
good
got a
face.
face. He's got
Yeah.
quite a face.
I took
Gaunt
that-
has a great face as well.
Oh yeah.
I took that opening scene as a joke. I read it completely as a joke, so I took it that we're to believe that little creature that is squashed
Salacious crumb looking.
was
Yeah.
he was he was part of the census for the town. He is counted in that 539. He goes
He
out
was
and
the
votes
town's
like
poet
everyone
laureate.
else. Yeah, he might have been. And I felt like a lot of things in this movie, it was really done just for humor, just for a quick joke.
So we continue to follow our mysterious outlaw character. He comes into the town of Oblivion, and the moment you see the town, like, I was just immediately charmed, because here we have aliens in cowboy boots and hats trying to use a modern day ATM outside of an old timey, like, ice cream parlor looking place. And I'm just like, this is so goofy and so charming. Like, I don't know about y'all, but I've grown up in pretty rural areas in like Colorado and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And a lot of our tourist trade revolved around just our pioneer history. We have a lot of old ghost towns, a lot of old mine tours, things like that. And you could get summer jobs if you wanted to dress up like a cowboy and walk around an old west town and pretend to have gunfights. And it felt like this was shot in one of those. This was shot in one of those little backwaters that kind of like hefts up the economy of these tiny little towns that I grew up in, So I was immediately kind of charmed by the location.
So you're telling me, Steve, that you did not guess properly that this was shot in Romania?
I did not guess this was shot in Romania. Is this a Romanian?
This is Romanian. This is the first
Wow.
movie that they shot on the official, I believe it's called Castle Studios.
Oh, okay.
So they basically put up a wall and made this big film studio in Romania. And according to Charles Band, one of the first things they realized they had in this studio were sets of the Old West. And they said, let's make something with that here. But no, it is the Old West Eastern Europe.
Yeah. All right.
The old West Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
I had to remark that they did a little bit of sci-fi-ification, which is another film school term, like with the excessive amount of outdoor fans that are in this film, which they really love to show you. Like, hey, look, isn't this is the future is nigh, right? Like, we have a fan outside. What? That's crazy. But then it kind of stops. Like, and the fans have like scaffolding. Like, they have a very futuristic look. Like, they're I-beams and they've got crisscrossies and all these things are technical terms, of course. But then you get inside the sets, and it's like everything's just like wood and like carved balustrades and like poker tables and stuff. And I was kind of like watching it going like, man, if somebody just would have taken a can of silver spray paint to some of this stuff, like, we could
just
really
metal
have
it up.
furthered that aesthetic a little bit. Like, it's we're kind of like, what this was reminding me of was Firefly. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the show.
Sure. Yeah.
From back in the day. But that show was more or less toying with this concept too. Like, eventually the human race is going to reach a point at which it spreads out into the stars and things revert to the homesteader kind of Wild West vibe, where there's no central government and you're kind of left to fend for yourself, and there's outlaws and whatever. And they kind of like blended it a little bit more, I'm going to blow some people's minds here. They did a little bit better job of blending that than this.
Shockingly, they did.
Direct to VHS movie. But yeah, I couldn't help but wonder, like, guys, just a little bit more, like, even wrap some of that shit in tinfoil and I'm ready for it. But yeah, but I mean, I either way, I was like charmed by it right away. So we finally meet this mysterious outlaw wandering into town, and it turns out he's not just an evil cowboy in a duster. He's also a lizard man. This is Red Eye, so called because he has an eye patch with a big red jewel on it. He's played by Andrew Divoff, who, according to this, nearly doubled in mass over the course of this shooting just from all the scenery he was eating, which is actually pretty impressive. Like, he expanded dramatically and had a diet subsisting mostly of drywall, which is pretty impressive. He was getting puffy by the end.
He was really crunching on it. He's so much fun in this movie. He knows exactly what movie he's in. And so he challenges the local marshal to a gunfight, which of course he wins because he's goosing himself with some kind of strange space magic. And then basically with the marshal dead and the cybernetic deputy played by Meg Foster kept put in jail, Red Eye is basically in charge of the town. And
it's clever, though.
Yeah.
This intro, because I didn't quite put it together until the shootout. because they like keep showing you as he's walking, and you just see his boots, and you don't see him all the way, but they're showing all the street fans that I mentioned dying as he goes by, and that ATM, it dies. Everything, all the electronics are shorting out, and so you're like, oh, is this guy doing this himself? And then he whips his duster back, and I thought he was going to get a gun out, but he carries a shovel on his belt that he only ever uses this one time. He digs the little hole, and he puts this space crystal, which is, I think, the is it draconium or draconium or something? Yeah, the kind of gold in them thar hills of this movie, and he buries it, and we learn later. That's why it's clever, but it's not clever, because it's like, in the moment you're like, I have no fucking idea what any of this is, and then later they explain it, and you're like, oh, that's why the thing in the beginning was the way it was. But he buries it, and apparently this element has the ability to like mess with electronics. So the sheriff has a force field in his sheriff badge, right? Because he mentions, George Takei mentions something about that later. So when the sheriff is like, don't worry, Miss Kitty, when he goes out to do the gunfight, I've got my trusty force field, and he taps his little sheriff star, and it turns on. He thinks he's going to be totally fine in the shootout with Red Eye, but because Red Eye's pulled a fast one, the force field doesn't work, and the sheriff gets blown away. That's clever. It just didn't get exactly ironed out until midway through the film in a really goofy scene that we need to spend some time on when we get there.
Oh, absolutely. So now the town of Oblivion is kind of in turmoil, and like, Red Eye and his cadre of goons are sort of running roughshod over the whole town. So they need to try and bring back the marshal's son. This is a guy named Zach Stone. He's played by a soap opera actor named Richard Joseph Paul. Gotta love a 3 first name kind of guy. And, he has kind of a reputation in town of being a coward. But you know what? Turns out he's got a pretty good reason to be, because he is an extreme empath, meaning he feels the pain of everyone around him. So he lives far away from anybody, so he no longer has to feel any kind of pain.
Yeah, and if you didn't make the connection between this and Peter David's novel about Counselor Deanna Troi, there's your connection right there.
There you go. There's the empath right there.
That's a good call, yeah. I actually missed that. I thought, because I read the... I wondered when he was later on, when Buteo is getting whipped and he's like wigging the fuck out. I was like, what is going on over here? But I kind of remember now a couple of lines of that. That might have been when I was pouring myself another beer, but or ordering one from the bar, since, But the bit there on the IMDb, when it gives the description of the movie, it says that he is a diehard pacifist, which I had to chuckle at. It just almost seems like an oxymoron.
Right. It's like, I'm the most aggressive fucking pacifist.
Yeah. If you doubt for a second what a pacifist I am, I'll kick the shit out of you.
I want to kick the fuck out of violence. Yeah.
I'm going to curb stomp fucking aggression.
So shortly after we meet Zach Stone, he has to rescue a native man named Buteo, who has been strapped out in the desert and is being attacked by a scorp, which is a big stop-motion Dave Allen creation that actually looks pretty great, as Dave Allen usually does. Now, Buteo is not played by a native actor. He is played by Jimmy F. Skaggs, who we might remember from Puppet Master. And Buteo is kind of the one big asterisk of this movie for me. Not crazy about this character. I was
wondering. Sorry, he is from Puppet Master. He's the guy. What's his name in Puppet Master? He's
Gallagher, right?
Gallagher, the bad guy.
Yeah. He's the main bad guy. Yeah. Also in Lethal Weapon.
Is he older? Is he really?
Yeah, he's the guy who gets shot to death in the Christmas tree lot in Lethal Weapon. So yeah.
Oh my goodness, weird. Lethal Weapon overlap with this movie.
Yeah, weirdly. Yeah. Also, Mel Gibson plays Red Eye. Crazy. Yeah.
I didn't recognize him with all the makeup on. Yeah.
In '94, he would have had more options, but yeah.
Yeah, he just wanted to go somewhere where he could be. He wanted to go to Romania so he could be really, really extremely offensive and aggressive.
Yeah, there are no laws.
He needed to get out of town for a while. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I wasn't crazy about the Buteo character. Like, he's not doing like full like red face makeup or anything, and like this is a different planet, so we're not saying he's exactly a Native American, we're just saying he's a native of this planet, but he's definitely playing on like the Indian tropes and things like that from
Big time.
old time cowboy days. And that's, you know, again, this is a pastiche. This is all a reference to like the old 40s and 50s westerns where cowboys and Indians was kind of the running theme. But I don't know. I could have done without him.
Yeah, there's a little bit of like the mystical native man character, which is like it was something we were, you know, really into.
We were fascinated with that for a long
my
time.
brain went to the most egregious of these, which I think is the opening scene from Ernest Goes to Camp, where there is a native man just throwing axes at someone, and it's like, if you believe in the spirit, the axes won't. I'm like, this is a movie about a guy who falls down at camp. What are we doing?
Let's stop editorializing about indigenous people.
Yeah.
You know, maybe this would have all gone down a little smoother with Mateo if he'd been played by Jonathan Depp, perhaps, because as we know, he is exactly just enough percentage of native to play a super offensive native caricature in a major Hollywood blockbuster. So
yeah, I believe 3/16. Yeah,
that's whatever it is, whatever you need.
Yeah, it boils down to that. Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
moving past
you know,
Mateo,
there's
like,
nothing great when a honest to goodness cannibal is the person who's looked at as the lesser of two evils.
In the casting couch, you mean in the casting room on that one?
Oof, that couch. No, thank you.
Yeah, that's a
that
cursed movie right
things.
there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I feel like we kind of don't need this mystical character because we already have several other like mystical characters. We already mentioned Mr. Gaunt. He's played by Carol Stroiken, who is this the most dialogue Carol Stroiken's ever been given in a movie? Because he's usually cast. He's an extremely tall man. You might know him as like Lurch from the Addams Family or the tall man from Twin Peaks, things like that.
Twin Peaks, Pacific
still
Northwest.
With us, still working. He was really creepy in Mike Flanagan's Gerald's Game a couple years ago. He's really good in that.
He pops up in A Doctor Sleep too, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Like he's a Dutch actor, you know, so he doesn't usually have a lot of speaking lines, but he gets a lot of dialogue.
Yeah, no, usually it's just like stand here and look foreboding or say one cryptic line. And here, he has a lot of a surprising amount of dialogue, and he's featured more than So I should just say that this was not technically my first time watching this movie, but it may have actually been my first time watching it from start to finish. I think this is one where I had seen 2/3 of it maybe, and then just bits and pieces on YouTube videos to the point, and then reading about it to the point where I'm like, okay, I know this is a scene from Oblivion, and this is where this happens. But I can't really remember the last time I sat down, and with Carl Stricken, I was like, yeah, this is a lot of him, more than I was remembering or expecting.
Yeah, his character isn't exactly death, but he's always seen as kind of like a harbinger of death. But he's also like an ally, so I don't know. It's a little confusing. He hangs around, but like people are always dreading when he shows up because it's always like bad news when he shows up.
If any, the movie even starts with that. Before we even get Red-Eye, before Red-Eye is into town, everybody is reacting and freaking out to Gaunt as he makes his way through the town because they know... he makes his way through town to the saloon because everybody knows that when he shows up, someone's going to die. And they're like, I don't want it to be me. So they try to get as far away from him as possible. And in the case of the opening of the movie, the person he's there to collect, whose soul he's there to harvest, is the sheriff who gets assassinated. So but then they break that later because he shows up later when Mateo does some mystical nativing and gazes into the liquid,
the tin
and
cup,
tells him, and he's like, oh, here comes this guy. And then you're like, okay, I understand that Gaunt means one of these people is going to die, but he shows up to say, hey, I'm just here to tell you that somebody already died. So it's like the movie kind of gets wishy-washy with it, and then he straight up does kill Red-Eye at the end of this movie.
Yeah, he's an ally, he's a buddy. Like, he's part of the skeleton crew at the end of the movie.
His hands dirty.
Yeah. I mean, I do want to shout out a couple other supporting characters that we haven't really gotten to. They're not very integral to the plot, but I do want to shout out Julie Newmar, of course, playing a mistress named Miss Kitty. Of course, a reference to her playing Catwoman in the Batman. And she's actually playing this like a cat. To the
Yeah.
point where I was getting kind of like threat level midnight flashes here, like, like how they didn't tell Dwight that he wasn't a robot, so he's playing it like a robot. I think
Yeah.
she assumed that she was playing a genetically modified cat person.
Yeah.
And nobody told her that she
that
wasn't.
reading.
I totally agree with you, by the way, because when she's hissing over the sheriff's dead body and stuff,
Yeah.
and I was like, okay, we're making a joke, and she's not in on it. Like, it's one of
No.
these deals, yeah.
And then we have George Takei playing the drunken Doc Valentine.
Jesus.
Buddy. Love George
Yikes.
Takei, but and he's a more talented actor than I think his reputation suggests. Like, he was a Tony nominee like recently. Like, he's done a lot of good stage work on Broadway. He's been good in movies, but whoo boy, he's struggling here.
Yeah.
Making a lot of Star Trek references, playing a
Yikes.
really drunken, sloppy doctor with like a really confusing accent.
He's like a doctor, barber, cybernetic repairman. He's like everything in the village, because in the town. He's when you meet him, and he's absolutely fall down drunk, and he says, Jim Beam me up, because he's drinking a bottle of Jim Beam.
Yeah.
Which I was like, okay, so Jim Beam still exists in the far future, and they haven't even bothered to change their logo, but whatever.
Yeah,
and then I
more than
read
1,000 years. Yeah.
Jeez, I
It's
guess
a
if
really
it ain't broke, don't
enduring
fix it.
company.
We never got better than Jim Beam, really?
Yeah, you know what? It would have been neat if they'd explored that, like, Jim Beam was actually had its own planet now and its own like form of government and standing army, and it was like a real force to be reckoned with in the galaxy. That could have been cool, but we don't do that. And I read that Takei's Star Trek lines, you probably read this too, were all ad-libbed, or at least that's what they said, so that they wouldn't get sued. Maybe.
Well, I just think
Peter
Peter David
claims,
trying to
yeah.
wash his hands of any blame in that is what that is. It's very convenient to say, like, oh yeah, George was having some fun making some Star Trek puns, and because
I'm just going to riff for a minute. I mean, like, I don't understand how that works. You know what I mean? Like, you're the one with the camera, man. If you don't like it, just don't let him say it.
Well,
But
and then
yeah,
we also have Isaac Hayes. We mentioned him earlier, but this is really just kind of a one-off cameo where he's playing kind of like a simple-minded shopkeeper. I don't really know what he's doing, but he's doing something. He's swinging for it. But they're all kind of incidental and just kind of around the fringes of it. But they're giving the universe here a little color. So Zach makes it back to the town of Oblivion, ready to avenge his father and kind of seek his destiny. But he's still struggling with his empathic cowardice, I guess. He doesn't want to get involved in any kind of violence. And Buteo is also looking for some vengeance for the death of his family. One of Red Eye's gang, who is the least interesting member of his gang, just a guy named Spanner.
Spanner looked like a member of Leonard Skinner to me, or something. Like, I was I have seen you looking almost exactly how you look right here. Like, you just walked out of band practice and into this movie. But who are, like, he's like, like the third guitar player in one of these like big arena rock bands, like sort of westerny kind of, or southern. But no, he's a stuntman. So
That guy
I don't know. I must have
definitely-
seen him in the background of movies getting shot or something.
That guy definitely owns El Camino. Like, you just know. You can just tell his whole vibe. He's like, he's got an El Camino out back,
Dude,
and he sleeps
he
in
has
it.
said these colors don't run, unironically, for sure.
At least once. Once.
So I don't want to veer too much from the plot synopsis right now.
No,
but
please.
while we're
Please
talking,
do.
that's fair. While we're talking about the designs, Steve, you mentioned giving the world a little bit of color, and I really do appreciate that. I really do appreciate that they have different designs. Like, the way these characters look, for the most part, unlike the one we were just describing, Spanner, he is sort of pretty nondescript. But two of my favorites, just in terms of costuming and character design, we haven't really touched on so far, which are Wormhole, who I just love the look of Wormhole. And
Wormhole.
obviously, we have to talk a little bit about Lash.
Please.
Oh, man. Okay, Lash
The
is
camera
played
loves
by
Lash.
Musetta Vander, who was a South African supermodel at the time. I did not realize until looking up her IMDb, she also played Sindel in Mortal Kombat Annihilation.
Yes, if you've ever seen a YouTube video of those compilations of like worst line deliveries,
She's in
her
there.
Sindel one is definitely in there, usually front and center.
Nice. I'll have to check that out.
she's a lot more fun here. I'm not going to say she's more restrained than the Sindel performance, but it's a little more of an enjoyable performance here. She's just like a baddie with an electric whip who is into a rough trade. So
Yeah,
she's just
no,
kinda,
she's as I said of Nicole Kidman in the Batman Forever episode of Barstool Film School. Lash is in heat this entire movie.
Oh,
like
exactly.
They're like, that's her direction. They're like, have you ever like owned a female dog, and it wasn't fixed? That's you right now, and go. And because I mean, she's just trying to. She's licking everybody. She's licking
like
Maddie.
scooting up on table legs. Yeah,
she can't help it.
I am here for all of it. And the costume is amazing. And this predates Xena Warrior Princess by a year.
Assless chaps. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but we've coasted right over Wormhole here, and I think we need to address it because, like, you might think certain things from thinking the character is named Wormhole. You may not think Spanish castanet dancer
with a knife,
or with a knife. Like, and I didn't look up the actor, but he's definitely not Spanish, right? That's not an accent that's natural to him, right?
So
I hope not. If
the actor's name is Frank Roman.
Okay,
and he
doesn't sound Spanish.
Well, it says he migrated to Miami.
Oh, okay, all right.
So that would lead me to believe
he's
that
still
it's
definitely
vaguely Hispanic.
He's playing a character hardcore. He's doing another caricature, I should say, like Mateo.
Like every time he gets up, he has to do a little flamenco stomp, and like he twirls like he's like bullfighting all the time. Like he is absolutely going for the rafters here. It's pretty wild and pretty fun. And then we also mentioned Bork, played by Erwin Keyes, who rounds out the gang. He's just the big, slow, strong one.
I love this
something
gang.
that you. I do too, and I have a question for you full moon aficionados here. Is this something that you see a lot in these movies? Because I forgot to mention earlier, to answer your earlier question, Jared, from way back at the beginning, Puppet Master is really where I've done my deep dive so far into the world of Full Moon, and I noticed it a bit in the Puppet Master series, and I noticed it in this, where it seems like different actors have been given different descriptions of the film they're in, like, okay, Wormhole, this is a comedy. Have fun. Okay, Mateo, this is really serious. Like, your family got killed. We're doing a space drama. And go. Like, hey, Lash. Yeah, this is basically softcore pornography. Have fun. Like, nobody is, like, on the same page in terms of what movie it is that they're making. And so or like George Takei. Like, you end up with this, like, really disjointed vibe. And I noticed it a bit in some of those Puppet Master movies, too, especially when we do Nazi Germany. And we're doing like literal Holocaust kind of stuff. We're dancing around that. And then it's also like, beep boop, here comes the cowboy, puppet. And it's all very silly. And this funny, German officer thinks he's in a comedy. And is that like a thing throughout all these movies?
I wouldn't say through all of them. I think it depends on what the movie itself is and what the series is. I think there is, let's call them tonal inconsistencies. And if we go by that metric, I think in certain series, but due to like budgetary restraints and things, and maybe a tongue-in-cheek approach to the material, some of the movies that border on horror or action also dip a little bit into comedy. I think when you see some of the other series, like Puppet Master has those issues as well. But I think when you look at like the Subspecies series, it doesn't lean as hard into camp. Like this, I think they just recognize like this is an inherently goofy, cheap movie. But I think at the same time, the people involved were like, well, I want to understand the motivation of this character and I want to play it a certain way. And it does clash a bit at times because this is an old West set and it's the early 90s and this is a low budget. I mean, 2.5 million actually, but still relatively low budget, all things considered. There's times when it looks like they're on the set of Hey Dude, and it's a little bit cheap. And I think it might be hard to play something sincerely when you're surrounded with something that's been, I don't want to say cast this way, but written this way, designed this way, costumed this way. So to answer the question you asked, I don't think it's something that's that you find in all of them, but I do think it's sort of a hallmark of Full Moon as a company for a lot of their franchises.
Well, and
Total
I think
inconsistencies.
the movie is about to tip its hand as just being like a straight up comedy when we get
Yeah.
to the funeral scene,
Oh my lord.
which I think is genuinely pretty funny. Like the idea that like they're holding this funeral in this funeral parlor, but it's also Thursday, and they always hold bingo on Thursday. So there's a bingo game happening in the other.
It's a
room that
very
keeps bleeding
funny
into it.
gag, actually. When
It's very funny.
everyone stops and
like-
yells at them, "It's Thursday."
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
mean they're interjecting even like, or he says something like, "Oh, I've always wanted to be like my father since I was 17," and then somebody in the next room yells, "Be 17!" Like,
Yeah, yeah.
it's pretty funny, you know. And I think that's where I realized, like, oh, okay, this movie is in on its own joke.
Right.
Like, this movie knows exactly what it's doing. It's not. This is not trying to present itself as like a major studio tentpole. They are just having fun.
No, and when they come out.
Go ahead, Jared. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. I was just going to say for that scene, it is a funny scene and it's played for laughs. And it got one of my biggest laughs actually in the movie was the cut to Julie Newmar at this funeral, just completely dressed like Moira Rose.
Oh yeah, that was amazing. that head dress thing she was wearing was epic. It was really good.
It was a
I thought it was-
fascinator that fascinated me. Yeah.
I like that. I thought this was. I pretty much got the score that we were doing comedy when Bateo and Zach, which is the name of everybody from the '90s that was your leading man, were Zach Stone. Were
Stone.
going
Zach
back. Yes, Zach Stone. When they were going back to Oblivion, but they stopped off at that establishment owned by Isaac Hayes to do something. Maybe just have a drink of water. I don't know. And then there's that like we have to do a bar scene. We have to do a brawl like any good Western needs to have.
Of course.
And yet like the choreography and like how Zach Stone is like not wanting to throw a punch because he's a hardcore pacifist is getting kind of like spun around and he's trying to jump out of the way. So two guys run into each other and all that. Like I was just waiting for the like Tweety Bird sound, like as like a guy's like shaking his head
Oh, of
laying on the
course.
ground. Like we were almost there.
Yeah, I'm pretty
Almost
sure
into
if you
sound effect
listen
territory.
carefully, there are some slide whistles in the background.
Yes, definitely. Boing.
I mean, yeah, all of that is very, very fun. The one other character we haven't really mentioned is Miss Maddie, and that's played by Jackie Swanson, and she's just kind of the heroine. She runs the local general store and is kind of criticizing Zach Stone for not being manly enough and fighting,
Yeah.
but she doesn't understand about his empathic abilities. So this all leads up to Buteo getting his showdown with Spanner in a
Probably my
pretty-
favorite scene. Probably
pretty
right here.
wild scene where
So good.
We
they're
finally get a
having
ghoulie in this movie.
we get a little Boogan. Yeah, we know Charles Band has a prerequisite for little guys that has to be
Yeah.
running around in his movies.
I love it.
So we go to this bar scene where Buteo challenges Spanner to an arm wrestling contest, but with a twist being that they're going to put this little monster on the table that reacts to fear and will attack the first person who feels genuine fear. So,
And
it's
Spanner
this-
was the guy that killed Bateo's family. He figures
Yes.
that out somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, this is all payback for that. And so this thing looks like just this little frog puppet that like sits on the table. It's
Delightful.
got these. I laughed out loud when they revealed it, and it's
Yeah.
got these big googly eyes, and I'm just like,
Oh, and
this
then they're
thing is
doing the Western
silly.
trope of cutting to extreme close-ups of eyes, and it's
Yeah.
like
Sergio Leone style.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
like Bateo's eyes looking back and forth, and Spanner's eyes looking back and forth, and then and then this little creature's eyes looking back and forth. It's
Which is
fucking
lucky
funny.
because that's the only way those eyes could move. That puppet
Yeah.
only has one way to move, and it's eyes back and forth. Like Ghoulies, you mentioned Ghoulies earlier. That's another series that I've dabbled in.
Okay.
Big fan of the Ghoulies Go to College. That's a fun time at the movies. That's probably a bar movie. That's a party movie. That's just a good old time to not really pay attention, but go, whoa, what am I seeing? But those Ghoulies, I love them. And they are only capable of opening and closing their mouths and having their eyes go back and forth. So a lot of the way they communicate with each other is just that or some combination of it. And I was totally seeing that with this little creature And the reveal of this creature too, right? Because Mateo has it when he sits down at the table and challenges Spanner to the arm wrestling competition, and he's got this box and you can't see what's in it. It's got like air holes and it's making this insane growling, and everybody's like really freaked out. And then he whips the lid off this thing, and it's this little fucking green puppet.
It's one step away from a Pokemon. Like, it's just this little. It's kind of a cuddly looking little guy for what's supposed to be like a fear-eating monster.
Yes.
But it's a really fun little sequence. Buteo triumphs, Spanner dies, and
he gets
as a
killed by this thing. It goes for the throat.
This is a PG-13 movie. Like, this is not one of the hardcore full moon movies.
But
but there's some blood here.
Yeah. It's almost all in this part of the movie. The most violent stuff all kind of happens right here. You get the creature killing Spanner, ripping his throat out, and then the other guy, whose name escapes me, the dude from House of a Thousand Corpses and other films, Bork. He blasts it, which it's when that puppy gets shot, it blows apart into chunks, and it's bloody. Not green blood, but like red blood. Maybe because its belly was all full from drinking Spanish blood or something. I don't know. And then almost immediately after this, or very close thereafter, Bateo is whipped, which isn't that violent, like gore-wise, but it's violent to watch. And then Zach blows Red Eye's arm off, and that's pretty bloody. So it's like all of a sudden we're like, oh shit, we're like having a movie now, like.
As I said, tonal inconsistencies.
Yes. And this movie does have a decided lack of boobers. Like when Lash showed up, I was like, okay, this will be the pair of breasts that I will probably see the most in this film. And then I checked the old IMDb for the rating, and it was because I was watching with my son, and I was like, okay, this is a PG-13, so we're not going to see boobers. We do see a lot of her like assless chaps and like her butt cheeks and stuff, but when the Buteo Spanner scene with the creature and ripping out Spanner's throat, and then Red Eye's arm getting blown off, I was like, whoa, this is one of those secret PG-13s where they like are just flirting with, because it's direct to VHS. So like you're not gonna have like angry parents yelling at the theater manager, so we can kind of like push that line, which I always appreciate, by the way, when we push the line, because the MPAA is bullshit.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And
second most corrupt organization in the country after the Supreme Court. Mic drop.
Oof. Okay. All right. Oh, we're getting political on here now. I'd best take a step back. Yeah, I mean, we should also mention, like, she's kind of been backdropped a little bit, but Meg Foster, her cybernetic character, has been repaired, and she is, like, now one of their allies, and she's literally a killing machine. She's got, like, some guns hidden in her hands and everything. She's kind of just here to be, like, the serious badass one, you know? Like, she doesn't get
She's
a whole
also
lot.
horny, though, too.
She's a little horny for Buteo, yeah, of course.
Bluest eyes you will ever see.
Oh yeah, piercing, crazy
so
piercing
much
eyes on Meg
so
Foster.
that I don't know how you guys watched this, but I watched it on Tubi in very much standard definition, to the point where Meg Foster's eyes almost looked in scenes like she was wearing clear white contacts.
I thought she was. I thought these were contacts.
Those are just her eyes. Yeah, she
These
just
are
looks
true
like that.
blues. Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, so I think she's coming back for the sequel as well. We're going to be talking about Oblivion 2 Backlash sometime. But either way,
shot concurrently, I read.
I believe so.
That's if you wanted to know if that is a hallmark of full moon features, yes, it is making people work for two movies for one paycheck.
So Peter Jackson didn't pioneer this for his Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Not
Do you
so
think
much.
everybody that worked on Oblivion got matching tattoos because they all became family afterwards?
I hope
George
so.
Takei
I hope they all
has
have
like
a little light up badge on their chest or something.
or they have the creature. They have the fear monster on their butt cheeks.
Yeah. That's a good place.
I never
for it.
realized how much I wanted Julie Newmar and George Takei to have matching tattoos until this moment.
There you go. You're welcome.
I can honestly say that's never occurred to me. Yeah, I can. But this scene, you know, after Buteo kills Spanner, he gets put in the stocks, he gets lashed, and this is what finally spurs Zack to action. There's a big gunfight where most of Red Eye's gang is defeated and driven out of town. So everybody's celebrating. They're thinking, hey, the new marshal's in town. We're all good here in Oblivion. Except that Red Eye ran off with Miss Maddie. He's got her captured out in the Badlands, which is a good place to visit, but a bad place to live, according to the sign that's out there in the Badlands, which you have to love. So a little party goes out to go have a final showdown with Red Eye and his crew, which results with Red Eye getting ripped apart by the oft-mentioned Night Scorps. I think there's a good drinking game in here to take a little shot every time they mention Night Scorps.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And you get them teased up a lot. It turns out they don't look all that different from the Day Scorps that we already saw.
No, they're bigger though. They're just a little bigger.
A little bigger, a little meaner. They've got nocturnal vision. Yeah,
that's true. We don't get Night Scorp vision, which is a shame. But I could imagine what it would be like. It's also important to note that Red Eye is down one arm because Zach did blow his gun arm off.
That is true.
His gunsling hand, I should say, and then he regrows it because he's a lizard man, so he can do that.
He's a lizard man, of course. He
can.
And
that scene was kind of gross too. I could appreciate that as like a special from like a almost like kitchen sink special effects. Like we're just like making a plaster mold in the hotel kitchenette kind of.
Totally.
I really could appreciate that. And then they have to put that line in, which I also I was like, oh shit, is this the sequel setup where they're like, was he torn up enough by the Night Scorps to where he's not going to regenerate? And Gaunt has to be like, he's dancing in the eternal, whatever. He says like some weird poetic stuff about like the nether realm to which he has some connection, which isn't really explored too much, but is there.
I think, I haven't watched it yet, but I think they literally pull a Legend of Curly's Gold and have him come back as just like Red Eye's identical twin.
Oh, I love that. Is it Divoff again?
Yeah, it's still Andrew Divoff. It's still he still looks the same. It's basically the same character,
patches on the
now
other
it's
eye,
his
though.
identical twin. Yeah. I hope it's just like a blue one now or something, It's like together they have 3D vision.
I love that.
Yeah, and that's kind of about where the movie ends up. Like, the Night Scorps get their meal and all is well in the town of Oblivion.
Except for Lash does get away, and she's one of the big baddies of the whole film.
Yeah, absolutely.
She escapes at the end.
And she's pretty central on the poster art for the second movie.
I was going to say, she's coming back, she's
going to be the big bad.
And that's an exciting because the sequel to Oblivion is something that I have not seen. So whenever we get there, which, there's only about 400 Full Moon and Empire movies, so we'll get there real soon.
It's like if you put these two movies together, though, it's still less of your time watching them back to back than if you watched Ant-Man 3. I bet you.
It's probably true. Yeah, it's probably true.
So you could have a better day.
This is one of the few Full Moon movies we've watched so far that didn't have any moments that like dragged for me. I was pretty consistently entertained by this movie for the entire 90 minutes. It's like this and Trancers so far are the ones that have really carried me through. And I don't know. I just had such a good time with this. I think it's the hallmark of a good bad movie to me is something that's made with a lot of love, but maybe with like, some tonal inconsistencies or like some ideas that just aren't mainstream or don't really connect in a lot of ways. And I think this is a really good hallmark of that. Like this is a great representation of everything a good bad movie should be. I have a lot of affection for this. I think it's really goofy and fun and just like an entertaining watch.
I think I sort of end up falling on the side of I kind of can appreciate any real noble attempt at genre bending. And I think this is just, it's tropes. I mean, this is a B movie. It's a Full Moon movie. So it's going to live in tropes. Like we've been saying this a lot about different parts of the show where it's like we get less fleshed out characters and more character types because that you're working within a lot of constraints. So you can dress Lash a certain way and say, okay, she's, the horny vixen character. You can dress Red Eye a certain way, which by the way, I'm a big fan. We didn't talk a ton about Red Eye's costume and makeup.
It's good.
It's good. Like, I really think it's good. I like it a lot. And
genuinely, yeah.
Just some of the other little touches in this. And like you said, I love the sense of not being of a specific time, sometime in the Old West, sometime in the future. It's Old West, it's aliens, like you said. They could have made a little bit more of an effort in the interior sets to add these flourishes
A
and
few
touches.
more aliens would have been nice too. You get a couple at the funeral, just like you just get like a couple of little goofy creatures sitting around, but they're not really that many. They're not really peopling the background as much as I would have liked in some of these.
No.
Well, what are you talking about? You've got a pair of twins wearing a really big coat.
Oh,
I
do
that's
love
all
that.
you
See,
need.
but you
That's
put
all
that
you
in the
need.
beginning of the movie, and here I am being like,
Yeah.
this movie is going to be packed with this shit. And instead, what they end up doing, which is, this was a thing from the 90s, in that the scene with Isaac Hayes that I was mentioning earlier, where you get Devolve out of Lizard Face for a cameo in the film,
Mm-hmm.
as just himself. You have two little people, and then another guy who seems to have been in an actor who seems to have been in some sort of accident, no longer has like legs or most of the lower half of his body. And then they're sort of supposed to be like, whoa, aren't these wacky aliens? And it's like, all right. I mean, I guess, was that actually cheaper than just coming up with like a latex costume? And then on the other side of that, is that shitty of me? Because like these guys need to work too. And
I'm with you. Like there is kind of a long history, and like some movie. Actually, speaking of another Oblivion movie, Living in Oblivion from 1994, also calls out this trope. Like it's Peter Dinklage's first film. He's a dwarf in that movie who's been cast to be in a dream sequence, and he even says like, "Why do you always cast dwarves if you need things to look like weird or surreal? Like
Twin Peaks
we're just
a little bit.
normal people." Yeah, he's like, why are you filmmakers always doing that to us? Like, so it's something that is an ongoing like trope, and I think it's something that we still need to start addressing.
It's the other, we're using them as the other. They fall under that umbrella. So if your movie is supposed to have lots of the other, then you can kind of get away with just casting some little people and calling it good.
And I mean, we never get into the nitty gritty. We never learn like what is the economy here in Oblivion? Why is this city or why is this town out here on this desert planet in the middle of nowhere? What are they doing? What is the goal here? Like, we never go into any of that nitty gritty because all we need to know is this is a small, like, little isolated ghost town. An outlaw is terrorizing it. We need to save the day. Like, it's much heavier on the Western than it is on the sci-fi, to the point where you, like you said, you're often forgetting that there are aliens and laser beams in this movie.
When the spaceship shows up in the beginning, I thought, oh, here we go. And then I think that's the one and only spaceship you see in the whole movie.
Yeah, this movie needs a cantina scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some to that regard.
It needs a cantina scene. And also, like you were saying, it leans a little bit more into the Western. And, I've seen enough of, what's the Bruce Campbell show?
Briscoe
County Jr. or Walker Texas Ranger, or Renegade, of these Westernish set shows from the 90s that were shot in SD and kind of look like shit these days. Like, this could have been a show. Like, I can picture like these sets as a series. I feel like I kind of would have enjoyed this as a series. It's just like
Flesh it out a little bit.
Yeah, each time like a new drifter kind of comes into Oblivion. Maybe you can have Red Eye and his gang are just a permanent fixture in the town, because I will say they're the most compelling part. I mean, there's fun little flourishes by seeing familiar faces and some great costuming choices, but there's a real kind of like where's Poochie feeling in this movie to me when Red Eye and his gang aren't on screen. And so, Red Eye and his gang they're just part of the town of Oblivion. The show's called Oblivion. It's set in this town where the Old West meets the future and aliens, and you just have a new character introduced who's going to beef with someone. We're 29 years out now. Like, let's get this thing made.
Yeah, Netflix, if you're listening, this is where all that money you're going to be saving by canceling everybody's subscriptions that have multiple people in their account. You could take that and apply it to Oblivion, the TV show.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to our ratings, our ongoing list of ratings of each of the Full Moon movies we're watching. Let's see if we finally get some deviation, because so far Jared and I have the exact same list. It's all been in the same order. Our list currently is Transfers at number 1, followed by Puppet Master, then Subspecies, Piranha Women, Test Tube Teens from the year 2000, and it ends with Evil Bong. Jared, where are you putting Oblivion?
I am putting Oblivion third between Puppet Master and Subspecies.
Okay, we finally have some deviation here for the first time. I am putting Oblivion second.
I thought about
right
it.
underneath
I thought about
Trancers.
it.
Yeah. So yeah, we finally have a little bit of deviation here. I just had such a damn good time with Oblivion. I think I just was just really in the right headspace and the right place to enjoy it. And yeah, I had a great time with
One
it.
thing-
and, I'm looking forward to seeing the sequel.
One thing I want to bring up about the movie that we failed to mention earlier was we talked a little bit about Sam Irvin working with Brian De Palma. This movie
Yeah.
is scored by Pino Donaggio,
Oh yes, it is. Yeah.
which it's crazy to think because I associate Pino Donaggio with so many sort of big budget movies of the 70s and 80s. I mean, he essentially took over as De Palma's composer after Bernard Herrmann died. And I think
Right.
starting with The Fury or Carrie, I think might have been the first one actually that he did with De Palma. And so I expect his name to be attached more to thrillers, erotic thrillers of the 80s. And just kind of fun that he's the person who scored this movie. A little bit of a surprise there.
Yeah, kind of an unobtrusive score for him. Like normally,
Yeah.
you're gonna know if you have a Pino Donaggio score.
This
in
just
those movies,
fades,
and you don't
yeah.
really notice it here. But it's good to know that he's there. Well, thank you everybody for listening to our episode of Oblivion, and thank you so much to Dylan for being here to talk this through with us.
Hey, thanks
We
for
really
having me
appreciate
on.
it.
Super fun.
Absolutely.
Let us know again. Where can we find your books, your podcasts, all of your stuff? Where can we find you?
You can find my books on Amazon. The Secret History of Port Townsend series. That's where I live. Port Townsend. You want to talk about haunted little towns. It's not a frontier
Yeah,
town,
I know
but it's
Port-
a Victorian seaport. It's sort of frozen in time. That's where I live.
I recently moved here from Bellingham.
Oh, shit.
A little
So you
bit
know
north
Port
of you.
Townsend. Yeah.
So I know Port Townsend.
It's
Absolutely.
a,
Yeah.
it's a place with a spooky history, IRL and in sort of like mythologically speaking. So I harvest that for short stories, and those are doing pretty well. And then the book that Jared flashed to the camera, which you guys all saw in your minds, I'm sure you could have pictured it. That is,
It had a cover.
It had a cover. That's a kind of a crazy mashup that I wrote, but it won me a Best Indie Book Award. It's kind of like sci-fi, horror, action, adventure, time travel-y. It's all
Yeah,
over
and
the map.
I'm giving it a legit plug because I remember when it came out, I saw Dylan posted about it. I ordered a copy. I read it at the beach, I think in the
Nice.
summer of 2021, and I had a great time with it. There Be
That's a beach
Monsters
book.
is the name of that book, and it was a fun one. It was a fun beach book for sure.
Right. Yeah. So you can find all that on Amazon, or you can ask your local bookseller and they will order it. And I actually recommend you do that because then they get their beak wet too. Bezos doesn't need his beak any wetter. But if you don't have a preferred local bookseller, you can find me on Amazon. And then in terms of my podcast, it's Barstool Film School. You can find it on wherever you get your podcasts. And I think we are coming up on our 5th episode here pretty soon. And so far we've covered Speed, Lady in the Water. We've got an episode out on Everything Everywhere All at Once. We've got Batman Forever. And in the Chamber, we've got RRR, which is one hell of a conversation because that is one hell of a crazy movie. And
I love that movie so
I
much.
mentioned Scorpion King. And unfortunately, we do take a trip into Ant-Man 3-ville. But we end up having fun talking about it anyway because we do drink. So that makes everything better, people.
Fair. It makes everything better.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. As for us, you can find us at Puppet Masters Castle Freaks at Instagram. You can also find us at puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com. If you want to send us any messages, we're happy to receive them. We'll read them on air if we start getting some letters. I also have a podcast called Cinema Arcade where we are playing, we're watching movies and then playing the video games based on those movies. Lots and lots of fun episodes coming out. I don't know when this episode exactly is airing, so I can't really plug what we're doing exactly, but we've got a lot of fun stuff on there, so definitely check that out. And Jared, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to give us any feedback, you can reach out to us at the email, puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com. Follow the Instagram for news and updates. Just if you've enjoyed the show so far, if you've enjoyed listening to us and the conversations that we've had, then please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or anywhere where you get your podcasts. It'll just help us reach a broader audience. And if you like it, tell a friend. If you don't like it, you can tell us. We are receptive to criticism, both constructive or otherwise. But yeah, if you like what you hear, then definitely like, subscribe, rate, and review. And Steve, what do we got up on the docket for next week? Where are we going?
Coming up next week, so we are, our schedule's like a little all over the place, so this might be subject to change. But as of right now, we are scheduled to talk about, hey folks, Steve jumping in again with another one of our signature changes of schedule. So opposed to the episode that we were going to talk about, which I don't even remember what it was, we are actually going to be talking about sorority babes in the slime ball bowl-o-rama, David Dakota's weird-ass horror comedy. We're going to be talking about it with our buddy J.R. Rawls. It's going to be a lot of fun, so check that one out next week. So tune in next week. We will see y'all later, cowboys. Yeehaw, yeehaw, yeehaw.
So long, Night Scorps.